Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a US politics special where I'm going to go through some of the things that have been going on in US politics over the last however long since I last did my update. We're going to look at some particular claims to do with sort of Donald Trump, what's he saying, what's the direction of travel, what's been going on in the Middle East, a whole bunch of, it's my eclectic mix of stuff, right? We're going to start with Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, who has answered very strategically when asked whether he trusts Donald Trump.
We intend to make the most of our advantages in these negotiations.
Do you trust him?
I will work with them and negotiate with them, yeah.
But do you trust him?
Look, my answer is my answer.
Okay, I'll leave it on that.
My answer is my answer. Do you trust him? Yeah, my answer is my answer. We'll work with him. He will not say that he trusts him. And by saying my answer is a very clever way of saying no. No, I do not trust him. Okay, so it's really interesting. You got what should be a strongly allied nation to the north of the US with Mark Carney in control, who's a securocrat. He's a technocrat. He knows what he's doing. He's technically adroit in finances and economics, saying, I don't trust Trump. And you have Sheinbaum, who's actually in Mexico. The Mexican leader is, if I'm correct in saying, the single most popular democratically elected leader, as according to the polls, in the world at the moment. Also, not a big fan of Trump, and Trump's polls are tanking. They're still, they had a little bump when he reduced tariffs on China from 145% to 30%. It's like I said to you before, if you cut chocolate rations by, from 50 grams to 10 grams, and then bump them up to 20 grams a few weeks later, everyone goes, oh, you're so wonderful, thanks for bringing back chocolate rationing to 20 grams. It's like, yeah, but it was 50 grams a few weeks before. And that's, of course, playing with people's psychologies there. So, cutting the tariffs to 30%, 30% tariffs are insanely high, right? You're just going from stupendous to insanely high, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, well done. Oh, he's all right, actually, Trump. So there's a little bit of a positive bump there, but generally his polling numbers are going down. Okay, we're now going to look a little bit at Trump himself, a bit of, whether he's knowledgeable and whatnot. We're going to go first to this. Now, I've talked to you before about Trump struggling to read. I watched him recently, and he did a fairly good job of reading through a press conference when he was talking with RFK Jr. about the medical costs of pharmaceutical drug costs that he was going to bring down. That was a bit of a readathon for him, but he certainly isn't a fan of reading. And I've talked to you about a president who doesn't read books. He never reads books, arguably hasn't read his own Art of the Deal ghostwritten book, according to some sources. Where's he getting his knowledge from? Something I very often share with you.
He doesn't really know how to read.
Now, this is the first of two clips I've had to kind of edit out post recording this because of copyright infringement. So that TikTok video didn't allow me to show what they showed. But essentially, it was this interaction between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, where Keir Starmer showed Trump the letter, the invitation for a state visit from the King.
From His Majesty the King, a letter. He sent his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know.
He is a great gentleman.
So he then opens the letter and then spends ages reading it, and there's silence in the Oval Office.
A great gentleman.
And it goes, silence, silence. I'm forwarding on silence, 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 silence.
On that?
And then he talks about signature, and then basically asks Keir Starmer to read the letter or read the paragraph for him. And lots of people were saying this is a pretty obvious indication that Trump struggles to read, doesn't want the embarrassment of having to read this letter out in public, hands it to Keir Starmer to read the pertinent paragraph out.
I've gotten to know him very well, actually. First term and now second term. Perhaps you'd like to say what that very important paragraph.
Yes, so this is a letter from His Majesty the King.
And then Trump gets him to read it out. So now, whether he couldn't read that or not, I don't know. But there are many people who will, who claim that he does struggle reading. That's often why he makes mistakes when he does dip into auto cues. Okay, so right, he's not the best reader, but actually, for someone who is the president of the United States in one of the most important positions in the world, like to have challenges reading are almost invalidating. I would say, if there's an awful lot of documentation you should be reading, I would assume, and that's why he doesn't take intelligence briefings, arguably, where he has to read through certain, what's the claim now? He's had 12 intelligence briefings in 100 days. And that, that's people presenting stuff to him. So, you do worry about where he's getting that bank of knowledge about what's going on in the world, what he needs to know about certain countries that he visits. And I think that is a problem. So, his knowledge base is an issue. Okay, imagine how many headlines this would generate if Biden has said this. And of course, we can talk about Joe Biden's particular health issues at the moment, but that's probably not the time or place to discuss that. This is Trump, the United Arab Emirates president.
Means jobs, because to me the most important jobs. I want jobs, and we have costs are way down. Groceries, they have a term grocery. It's an old term, but it means basically what you're buying in food. It's a pretty accurate term, but it's an old-fashioned sound. But groceries are down, costs are down, eggs are down. They were, first week they were hitting me.
What are you talking about? It's not an old-fashioned term. You go to the grocery store, but of course he never goes to the grocery store. He never does his shopping. So he never gets groceries. It's just, what are you talking about? This is just insanity.
With eggs, we're up 200%. And now they're down to a number that is amazing. We're down 97, 98% from where they were. And they said, you won't have eggs for Easter. Well, everybody had eggs for Easter.
He's just talking absolute nonsense. Those numbers are just pulled out of his backside.
At a very reasonable price. At the White House, we had our little Easter egg roll, and we had...
So, and he's just waffling on in just inane nonsenses. But I am going to return to this idea of just making numbers up, because there are some really serious, I think, issues with effectively lying to the electorate consistently about these sorts of numbers, economic numbers. Now, it's no wonder, it says this source, that Trump's press secretary hasn't released the transcripts of Trump's remarks over the last 2 months. Maybe it's because he says things like this.
The drone is killing tremendous numbers of people. You hide behind a tree and the drone comes down and it circles you with fire. You don't have a chance. The tree comes down also, by the way. It's so intense. You see these trees being knocked down like they're being sawed down by a top-of-the-line timberman, like who? Sean Duffy. Do you know that Sean Duffy, the head of the Transportation Department, who's working right now on the airports and getting a system because Biden didn't do a thing for 4 years, and Pete Buttigieg was the head, and he goes bicycling to work. The drone...
So, anyway, that's the President of the United States. My goodness. Oh, okay. And then we've got this kind of montage here.
Is your administration sending migrants to Libya?
I don't know. You'll have to ask Homeland Security.
Is anyone in your administration right now in contact with El Salvador about returning Abrego Garcia to the United States?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the Attorney General that question.
What's your expectation for your meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister tomorrow?
I don't know. He's coming to see me. I'm not sure what he wants to see me about.
You just announced a new nominee for the U.S. Surgeon General who never finished her residency and is not a practicing physician. So can you explain why you picked her to be America's top doctor?
Because Bobby really thought she was great. I don't know her.
Have you been briefed about the soldiers in Lithuania who are missing?
No, I haven't.
A tariff exemption for certain baby items like car seats is under consideration. Will you exempt some products that families rely on?
I don't know. I'll think about it. I don't know. I really don't.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know.
Yeah, so there's an awful lot of I don't knowing going on at the moment. And I think that's just deeply worrying. Not getting press briefings, not reading. There's just a real sense of ignorance there. And then, you get incidents like, I've talked about this a number of times, where the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has arranged the White House press corps in very favorable ways, so that she's given seats to influencers, she's changed who gets in there, she's trying to move out mainstream media and get in right-wing obsequious media that are just going to ask gimmies to Donald Trump. And this is what is happening, being picked up here by John Oliver on Last Week Tonight. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut out the bit where the host talks at the beginning and the end, because in hindsight, I got hit for copyright infringement. So here is just what Donald Trump says, rather than any comedy either side of that.
What has made you and your team so effective in finding, locating, apprehending, and deporting these violent, illegal migrants?
I love this guy. I wish more people would ask questions like that.
Do you think it shows just how out of touch they are with the American people, especially given that 79%, according to a CBS poll, approved of your?
I love this guy.
How come when these Democrat elites want tariffs, everything's hunky-dory, but when President Trump wants tariffs, all hell breaks loose? Do you see this double standard?
I love this guy. Whoever the hell that is. That's really nice. I appreciate that question.
And there you go. Just the nature of how these pro-Trump influencers are able to be the first port of call for questioning for Donald Trump. So he just gets gimme after gimme and then just says how wonderful they are. Well, it's an insidious, creeping sense of being beholden to the dear leader, isn't it? Where you are arranging everything so Trump is just never held to account. No one is criticizing him. No one's allowed to criticize him. He is just asked really softball questions the entire time by a media that he controls. That is what's going on here, and it is very, very disturbing. Now, just to before we take that idea a little bit further, actually, no, let's talk about that now. So that sense of overt autocracy, just this is what it looks like in a different form, right? So Trump has ordered federal departments to purchase and erect huge banners of his face on all federal buildings at an estimated cost of $184 million. Trump says they do it in North Korea and China to show respect for supreme leaders. Why shouldn't we? Deeply creepy, enormous brooding banner of Trump now hangs next to Lincoln outside the Department of Agriculture. That's the sort of thing you would expect to see in a dictatorship, and someone's done some. There's one of Lincoln just a few along, and someone's done some, I presume, AI of banners between the two with this long arm stretching out, and then Lincoln's flipping a bird after this long arm here to Trump's face. So I thought that was pretty funny. Now, the GOP had talking about sycophancy and wanting people to just, where are we, do exactly what he wants. Oh, I've got it. Here it is. Sorry, I've got it out of position. I played you the hot mic where...
Are we close to seeing Mr. Kim here at the White House?
Could happen.
I played you a hot mic where Trump was speaking to Ducey on a plane, and this happened some time back, and the hot mic involved Trump basically saying what he says here. I never realized he's also said it in public interview. So he's actually been open about how much he wants his electorate to treat him like the people in North Korea treat Kim Jong-un.
Are we close to seeing Mr. Kim here at the White House?
Could happen. I mean,
they talked about that yesterday.
I would have him. Yeah, I think it's something that could happen. Yeah. Hey, he's the head of a country, and I mean, he's the strong head. Don't let anyone think anything different.
Right.
He's a dictator who murders opposition. Any naysayer. There is no opposition. There's no formula. He's a dictator. So, of course, he's a strong man. It's ridiculous what he says here.
Let anyone think anything different.
Right.
He speaks and his people sit up at attention. I want my people to do the same.
Well, just before you met with him, he cleaned house. 3 of his top generals, some of the hardliners, he fired. Then you go over there and you took some heat over saluting one of the generals.
I think he fired at least, okay? When you say he
3
fired.
that we know of.
I think maybe fired at least. Fired may be a nice word.
Are we close to...
So he's saying a strong man, and essentially he's taken out generals he didn't like fired, as in shot them. You know, he's shot with an anti-aircraft weapon. One of his, I think, relatives on a runway once, Kim Jong-un. So, you know, I want my people to treat me like they treat him. It's absolutely despicable, that. Anyway, so this is where I was going. GOP, so the Republican Party, had all 3 branches. So it's got the executive, it's got Congress, judiciary as well in terms of Supreme Court, really, but it's got the Senate and the House of Representatives, so and the President too. So they should be able to pass all sorts of bills, but they appear not to have been able to do that. In fact, this has been like the lowest outcome session. Trump has signed just 5 bills into law, fewer than any president in their first 100 days since at least the 1950s. He's just not interested in governing through the usual mechanisms, just wants to rule by executive order unilaterally and not rely on the governments. So a new survey shows that the global trust in the United States has plummeted since Donald Trump returned to office. Trump himself is less popular internationally than Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Israel and Iran come out as the least popular countries in the world. The Alliance of Democracies has published its annual Democracy Perception Index, the world's largest annual survey on democracy. 111,000 respondents across 100 countries were surveyed between 9th and 23rd of April 2025. The survey shows that the net perception rating of the United States fell from plus 22% last year to minus 5% this year, just ahead of Russia with minus 9%. Share of countries with a positive image of the US dropped from 76% last year to 45% this year, and China went up from 5% to plus 14%. The US is now the 7th least popular country in the world in terms of respondents' perceptions. The bottom 3 are Belarus, Israel, and Iran. While Russia and China have improved their ratings significantly since 2022, the US has fallen sharply. Globally, perceptions of the US are now deeply negative in Canada, Mexico, most of Europe, the Middle East and North Africa, China, Australia and Southeast Asia. Only Ukraine, Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, India, Thailand and the Philippines are still a net positive. But of course, I think that might have changed even now in places like Ukraine. Sentiment has swung in favour of China worldwide, with only Poland, Ukraine, Georgia and Japan standing out as still being strongly pro-US. Most other countries have become mildly or strongly pro-China. This is clearly being driven by Donald Trump and his policies, especially tariffs. In 82% of the countries, more people view him negatively, 57% on average, than positively, 27%. This is worse than Putin, 32% positive, 49% negative, and Xi, 32. In a striking contrast to the other two leaders, Trump is severely unpopular in both democratic and authoritarian countries, and in every part of the world except sub-Saharan Africa. Putin and especially Xi are popular in authoritarian countries, particularly in Africa. So, you know, it's not looking good for the perception of the US and for the perception of Trump, and that translates to soft power, right? Okay, now let's move on to a slightly different subject. We're going to go on to Middle East gifts that I've spoken about a number of times before. We've seen a lot in the mainstream media. Let's look a bit more deeply into this.
Saudi Arabia giving $25 million, Qatar, all of these countries. These are people that kill women and treat women horribly, and yet you take their money. Not a gift.
So this is Trump in earlier times slagging off people taking money from the Middle East. And let's listen to him now.
To me, it's a gift to the Department of Defense, and you should know better.
Why don't you give back the money that you've taken from certain countries that treat certain groups of people so horribly?
You should be embarrassed asking that question. They're giving us a free jet. I could say, no, don't give us. I want to pay you $1 billion or 400 million or whatever it is. Or I could say, thank you very much.
Why don't you give back the money? I think it would be a great gesture.
I thought it was a beautiful gesture. Now, there are those that say we shouldn't be accepting gifts to the Defense Department. And I would say only a stupid person would say that.
It should have never happened. And I think you owe an explanation to the American people.
We're giving to everybody else. Why wouldn't I accept the gift?
If I ever said that, that's quid pro quo. Saudi Arabia.
Really well put together there. Just shows how completely contradictory his views are now to what they were previously, where he was demanding that, I presume that's Hillary Clinton or something, give gifts back to the Middle East, and there he is accepting insanely large gifts from the Middle East and saying, hey, there's nothing to see here. And of course, we talked about how Pam Bondi was taking $115,000 off Qatar previously, and she gave the go-ahead to the jet deal. We hear that Patel, head of the FBI, has also taken money, I think, from Qatar. Then we hear Susie Wiles. It was on Qatar's payroll as well. That's his chief of staff. Susie Wiles and Kash Patel were both on Qatar's payroll. More encouraging discoveries. President Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, led lobbying firm Mercury Public Affairs when it represented Qatar's embassy in Washington. FBI Director Kash Patel worked as a consultant for Qatar, though he didn't register as a foreign agent. At this point, it would be quicker to list who in this administration wasn't a foreign agent for Qatar. So again, it looks like the grift goes on and on. David Frum says, am I the last to know the Qatar jet offered to Trump turns out to be an item unsuccessfully for sale since 2020. The gift is not only a Trump gift, but also an attempted scam on the US taxpayer who will assume costs the owners no longer wish to pay. The royal family offloaded a surplus sister jet as a gift to Turkey's authoritarian President Erdogan in 2018. It's even gaudier than the plane they want Trump to take and the US taxpayer to maintain. Goodness me. And then we have Phil Dunner talking about this. So the Boeing 747 Qatar has offered to give President Trump is not state-owned. It's a private plane of HBJ, Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani, former Prime Minister of Qatar, billionaire thug and Hamas godfather. The tail number includes his name, P4HBJ. To be clear, HBJ isn't a Qatari official anymore. He's a billionaire hotel and real estate tycoon. He's a Qatari royal who owns a Mayborn, Beverly Hills and 8-acre Bel Air estate, where we've protested regularly since October the 7th massacre, which he funded, as in the Hamas massacre. He has blood on his hands. This is who HBJ is and what he's done. He sheltered the 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He's a main patron of Hamas in Doha's 5-star hotels. He's a bagman behind the $30 million monthly payments to Hamas in Gaza. He's on record saying vile and anti-Semitic statements. He's a Jew hater, says this source. HBJ retired in 2013, but he still funds terrorists and bullies, rivals and silences critics with black ops, PR firms, spyware and hush money, including me. Just 2 years ago, says Pini Dunner, HBJ tried to sell the 747. No one wanted it. It was too big, too expensive, too useless. So now he's gifting it to President Trump, which he thinks is a brilliant move. But he's not Qatar. He's a criminal godfather. HBJ, from harboring terrorists to bribing presidents. Disgusting. So there you go. That is what that plane is. And like talking about like taking money from sort of criminal godfathers and terrorist sympathizers, etc., etc. Of course, I talked to you previously about the leader of Syria who was formerly in Al-Qaeda. So regardless of the politics of this, says Spencer Hakamune, I find it objectively hilarious that the United States has a $10 million bounty on this guy's head for being a member of Al-Qaeda. And the President of the United States is doing photo ops with the same exact dude. Now, there are some added context. There is some added context here. Ahmed al-Sharaa, the man pictured, had a bounty of $10 million. This bounty was removed by the Biden administration following the overthrowing of Bashar al-Assad's Syrian regime in an effort to initiate diplomatic relations with the new Syrian government. So let's make sure that the correct information is out there. But as I said to you before, it is really interesting for many that Trump appears to be completely unconcerned about the visuals of anything and just getting into bed with people who will line his pockets, essentially. So this is a guy that offered him the Trump Tower in Damascus and a minerals deal like Ukraine in Syria. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. I'm all about making the money. And I bet he doesn't really know who this guy particularly is. He called him a handsome man, a beautiful man, etc., etc. The same sort of rhetoric we hear him say about Mohammed bin Salman and other people who, he was arguably behind the assassination and butchering of Jamal Khashoggi, the American journalist. And there's Trump just waxing lyrical about him and the Emir of Qatar and here the leader of Syria in a way that ends up not just being politically useful, which is what I said before. There's ways that you can talk about this man that would be much more serious and diplomatic rather than just fawning over him, which then becomes quite sickening and a little bit controversial. Anyway, so then we've had the White House declaring and Trump declaring that you've got all of this money coming out of these deals that he's doing in the Middle East. So President Donald Trump secures historic 1.2 trillion economic commitment in Qatar alone. Now, Qatar's GDP is only 213 billion. So the number is nearly 6 times the size of Qatar's entire economy. They are lying to you. And actually, the economist Justin Wolfers says, about the 14 trillion. So Trump says he's come out and done $14 trillion worth of, economic activity with the Middle East. Trump claims to have raised over the past few weeks that amount. He made it up, he says. The tell, the White House won't send receipts. The other tell, he's claiming that every dollar a Qatari earns over the next 5 years will be invested in the US. Let's go and look at this in some detail. So, quote, the jobs and money coming into our country, said Trump, there's never been anything like it. You see that the companies are American-based companies. They're doing work that wouldn't have been available to them except for November the 5th. In other words, with him coming in. It's not quite 4 months since he regained presidency, and he's brought some $14 trillion in new investments into the country, with $4 trillion just from his trip to the Arabian Peninsula alone. The figure seems incredible given that the nation's entire gross domestic product is only about 29 trillion. And economists say that there is a reason for that. It's incredible because it's not remotely true. No, University of Michigan economist Justin Wolfers said when asked if Trump's assertions are possibly correct. That's the answer. The White House press office did not respond to Huffington Post's request for a full list of investments totaling $14 trillion, nor one for the list of those making up $8 trillion when Trump was claiming that amount just 2 weeks ago. This has gone up from 8 trillion to 14 trillion in 2 weeks. Trump, nevertheless, has been boasting for months that his return to office has brought in many trillions of dollars of investments that otherwise would not have happened. Quote, before the end of my first full business day in Washington, in the White House, we've already secured nearly 3 trillion of new investments in the United States, he said on January the 21st, a day after his inauguration. By April the 2nd, the day after the day he announced Liberation Day, tariffs that sent financial markets into turmoil, the total had doubled. Quote, so far, it looks like we're going to have about 6 trillion in investments. The number kept climbing over recent weeks to 8 trillion, 9 trillion, and finally 10 trillion in the days before he left on his first extended foreign trip. Quote, other administrations haven't had $1 trillion over a 4-year period, even over an 8-year period. We have over $10 trillion committed in one form or another over 2 months, he said on Monday. At a photo opportunity with business leaders in Qatar on Thursday, he bragged about the total that he would have brought in from that country, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, over the course of the week. It would be a total of 3.5 trillion, 4 trillion just in this 4 to 5 days, he said. That's nuts and baseless, said Jason Furman, a top economic advisor in the Obama White House and now an economics professor at Harvard. Quote, I doubt the press releases even add up to that. But regardless, press releases are a terrible way to determine the investment or the impact of the policies of his policies on it. Trump's White House website indeed does not show how the number anywhere near 14 trillion or even 10 trillion does not show a number anywhere near that. The website's Trump Effect page that tracks major investment announcements that were made possible by President Trump's leadership lists pages of figures, including 1.2 trillion from Qatar, 500 billion from Apple, 11 billion from Gilead Sciences, cleared down to 6 million from LGM Pharma. When totaled, they came to 3.9 trillion. Even if the 200 billion in new investment claim from the Emirates visit is added to that, it still amounts to only 4.1 trillion, about 10 trillion short of his claims. Quote Wolfers, quote, I have a PhD in economics and I can tell you that 4.1 trillion is less than 14 trillion. If you want, I can check the 2 more PhDs in economics in the house right now to see if I'm right. He said the investments listed do not mean that Trump had anything to do with them or even that they are accurate. Quote, Trump has claimed a $1.2 trillion investment deal from Qatar. Qatar's annual GDP is a bit less than $250 billion per year. So he's claiming an investment that would require every dollar every Qatari earned over the next 5 years, Wolf has said. Trump would exaggerate or simply make things up is not a surprise. He's been famously reckless with the truth for his entire adult life, sometimes because he doesn't know what is correct and doesn't care, and other times because he knows the truth and consciously lies anyway. And that's a really interesting point. There's a mixture of like I was saying earlier, he just doesn't know. So he just makes stuff up, and other times he does know, but he just blows the truth out of the water. Wolf has said that Trump has also had the advantage that most people do not fully comprehend large numbers. Now, this is really, really important. I've written an article on this about, it was called On Defending Billionaires. Unfortunately, all my articles are no longer online because the website ran out of funding, or the media organization I used to write for ran out of funding, and so they've all been archived, but I've got about like 4,000 odd articles, 4,000 to 5,000, and they will go up on a new website once it's finished. But I wrote this article on defending billionaires. When people who say, oh yeah, we should give tax breaks to billionaires because they generate wealth, don't understand how much money billionaires have, because they don't understand the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. And it's really, really important. Justin Wolfers is absolutely right here. He says, Wolfers said Trump also has the advantage that most people do not fully comprehend large numbers, making it easy to confuse them with grandiose statements. The problem is the word million, billion, and trillion all sound similar, he said. So my realistic answer is that he's a known liar. I can also show you that he's a lazy liar. So if your investment announcement is full of lazy lies, what part of it should we infer as being true? Now, just to add to that, there was a meme that went around a couple of years ago when Jeff Bezos was the richest man in the world. Of course, that's been blown out of the water now by Elon Musk, although I don't know if his Tesla wealth might have diminished somewhat. So anyway, Elon Musk supposedly has $200 billion. Okay, it's not all in cash, but you get the point. Right, the meme, and this checks out, mathematically it checks out, as in this is truth or fiction. The meme was, if you worked every single day making $5,000 a day from the time Columbus sailed to America, so it was at 1492, to the time you are reading this tweet, you would still not be a billionaire. $5,000 every single day of every single year, you would still not be a billionaire, and you would still have less money than Jeff Bezos makes in a week. No one works for $1 billion. Okay, and it says at the end of the article where it goes through the calculations here, it says the original claim contained the original tweet contained a claim that the person earning $5,000 a day and 1.8 million per year would take more than 527 years to earn 1 billion. That is true. Our imaginary immortal high wage earner would actually have to keep up their rate of pay for another 35 years after that, finally receiving a single $1 billion in the year 2054. Now that's $5,000 a day since 1492, right? So now you're talking 12 trillion, and these numbers are ridiculous. People just can't grasp the difference really between $1 million, $1 billion, and $1 trillion, and how vast those numbers are. And so for him to come back and say, hey, yeah, I've made 12 trillion, 14 trillion, whatever, for the US in a bunch of months, it's not true. Now, the guy that claims to be America first and said his tariff policies would bring factories and new businesses to America will be using our taxpayer money, American taxpayer money, to build a massive AI factory in an already oil-rich nation. Why isn't this being built here? So the US will demand a massive AI data center in Abu Dhabi. See the list of deals Trump announced in the Middle East. So on the one hand, he's saying all manufacturing needs to be onshored. I mean, this is just obscenely hypocritical. All manufacturing needs to be onshored, so we are going to tariff the crap out of every nation until we get that stuff being manufactured here. Then he goes to the Middle East and says, do you know what we're going to do with US money? We're going to pour it into the UAE so that you can build a huge AI factory there. Okay, well, why aren't you putting that investment, that huge investment, into the US? Because you're hitting countries with tariffs so that that doesn't happen. And you've literally gone abroad and made that happen. You are offshoring manufacturing with American money. This is obscene, absolutely obscene. Now, Chris Murphy has something to say about Trump's grifting.
So why did he choose these three countries to go to for his first major foreign trip? It's not because these are our most important allies or the most important countries in the world. It's because these are the three countries willing to pay him off. Every single one of these countries is giving Trump money. The plane from Qatar, an investment in his cryptocurrency scam from the UAE, and they are asking for national security concessions in return. This is the definition of corruption. Foreign governments putting money in the president's pocket, and then the United States giving them national security concessions that hurt our own security. By the way, the plane is not a gift to the American people, as the secretary said. It is going directly to Donald Trump. That library will take a decade to build, and so once he leaves the White House, until the library is built, he gets to use that plane to fly around all of his billionaire friends, while his policies result in millions of Americans losing their health care and having to pay higher costs. That is the definition of corruption.
Don't disagree at all. Now, we have actually something, I'm going to pull this one in next, so I think it runs on better. Talking about AI and chips, this is the Bulwark talking to Tom Malinowski here, Bill Kristol, who's a diplomat, about this kind of activity concerning US-made chips and the Middle East and the UAE.
Yeah, so I think the most concrete and immediate thing is the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, wants to, they know that oil and gas won't last forever. So the next thing they want to dominate is artificial intelligence. The Biden administration, with the support of a lot of Republicans, imposed curbs last year on the export to a lot of countries, including the Gulf, of the most sophisticated microchips that you need to set up to lead in the development of artificial intelligence. Trump just agreed to waive all of those restrictions. And the reason those restrictions were in place, well, number one, the UAE has very close ties to China. And we all know we don't want China to win the race for the.
So for those of you who have followed my Ukraine videos, right, the UAE is very close to Russia and China. So anything that goes to UAE generally will end up in Russia when we're talking about like sanctioned stuff. Right? You've seen these huge spikes of exports to Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and these sort of places around Russia. Well, the same with the UAE, big time. The UAE ends up then getting that stuff to Russia. Well, if you don't want these chips to go to China and then instead you export them to the UAE, they will go to China. So now Trump has waived these export restrictions to the UAE and is saying we're going to build an AI factory with American money and we're going to come away with all these trillions of dollars just flowing everywhere. Then the argument being made here is, well, the US is hurting its own interests by not only, you could argue, offshoring that money rather than investing it in the US, but then they are giving or they are facilitating China getting their hands on these incredibly important products.
The future of AI. So the fear was that if you give these advanced trips to the UAE, the Chinese are going to get them. And number two, the UAE is a mass surveillance totalitarian dictatorship. And, we don't know what the future of AI is going to look like. Is it going to be helpful to humanity? Is it going to destroy humanity? Probably some combination. Because of that uncertainty, one thing we should all, I think, agree on is that the development of this technology should be led by democracies that have safeguards, that respect privacy, that are transparent, that have legislatures, that hold hearings when things go too far. The UAE is not that country, it's just the opposite. So for the president of the United States, who claims to be America first, to become complicit in helping this friend of China that has already kind of masterminded a surveillance-based dictatorship to, in effect, lead the world in developing this technology is absolutely crazy. And yet that's what's happening. That's what the Emiratis are getting for their gifts to the Trump family.
Absolutely. And this is in a week where President Trump's dinner for the top buyers of his meme coin is going to take place. Those buyers reportedly spent $148 million in order to make it onto the invite list for the dinner. Hard to overstate how outrageous that dinner is. That's coming from Citizens for Ethics. You got Rand Paul not happy about this kind of grifting here, and he's a Republican, albeit a libertarian one, absolutely going to town on Donald Trump accepting this bribe from Qatar.
Paul, let me start right there. So we heard from Steve Witkoff. I know you've raised concerns about this gift of this Qatari jet. He says the Qataris are giving it simply because they've decided to donate something because of all the wonderful things that we've done for them in the past. Do you buy that the Qataris don't expect anything in return for a $400 million gift?
I guess, first of all, I think my fear is that it detracts from a largely successful trip where the president is talking about opening up and doing more trade with the Middle East, which is a good thing, particularly amidst all the protectionism and directing away from trade that we've had going on. I would say that we sell more arms than any other country in the world. We are the largest arms merchant in the entire world, and a lot of those arms go to Gulf sheikdoms and monarchies like the Qataris. Those decisions are made by the executive branch. We have a veto power in Congress, and I've been part of vetoing or trying to veto arms before to Qatar as well as to Saudi Arabia over human rights abuses. So could it color the perception of the administration if they have a $400 million plane to be more in favor of these things? Perhaps. It at least gives the appearance of a conflict of interest. I don't think it's worth the headache, and I think it's detracting from a largely successful trip to the Middle East, which includes a lot of good things as far as expanding trade.
He also said it's a perfectly legal transaction. Do you see it that way? I know you raised questions about the emoluments clause.
I think it sort of depends on how the transaction is set up. Is there a possibility that, could they donate it back to Boeing and Boeing sells it to us? There's a lot of ways this could be arranged. But I think what set up signals that people were concerned about was that it was going to be temporarily part of the government and then it was going to the president's library when the president retires. So I think all of those things could be fixed, could be corrected. There probably is a perfectly legal way, but right now it's raised more questions than I think it's worth.
Okay.
Right now, it's illegal. It's a long and short of it. Now, talking about illegal grifting, here is Speaker Mike Johnson just dodging having to answer difficult questions. So, anyway, over to Mike Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, you were very critical of President Biden and his family's foreign business dealings. You supported an impeachment inquiry as a result of it. Are you equally concerned about President Trump's family's business dealings, especially given the fact that he is in a region now where his family has billions of dollars of investments in Doha and Saudi Arabia, and the fact that he has a crypto business now where he's auctioned off access to the White House for the highest bidder in his meme?
Look, there are authorities that police executive branch ethics rules. I'm not an expert in that. My expertise is here in the House, okay? I'll say that the reason many people refer to the Bidens as the Biden crime family is because they were doing all this stuff behind curtains, but in the back rooms. They were trying to conceal it, and they repeatedly lied about it, and they set up shell companies, and the family was all engaged and getting all on the dole. Whatever the President Trump is doing is out in the open. They're not trying to conceal anything.
Mr. Speaker, the investment in the meme coin, those folks are not transparent. We do not know who those people are.
I don't know anything about the meme coin thing. I don't know. I can just tell you that, I mean...
Which is like, Trump is completely transparent. Yeah, but the meme coin thing isn't transparent. Yeah, but I don't know anything about that. Oh, that seems kind of unfalsifiable. So whenever Trump does kind of go against your previous ethical evaluations and judgments on Biden, whenever Trump does that, you just don't know about that. Oh, yeah, no, I don't know anything about that. Oh, I don't know anything about that. But what about this, that, and here and there of Trump? Oh, yeah, I don't know about them. But all these other places, Trump's really transparent. He's just transparent. Well, yeah, he's transparently doing it in front of your face. He's like grifting in public, and everyone knows about it. And he announces it and talks about it on the news.
President Trump has had nothing to hide. He's very upfront about it, and
yeah,
there are
upfront about corruption.
People who watch all the ethics of that. But I mean, I've got to be concerned with running the House of Representatives, and that's what I do.
Oversight, though, that's the congressional responsibility, isn't it?
Congress has oversight responsibility, but I think, so far as I know, the ethics are all being followed. So yes, sir.
Anyway, someone else asked me a question because this is too painful. Okay, Attorney General Pam Bondi sold $1 million to $5 million worth of shares in President Trump's media company last month, on the same day he announced expansive tariffs that led to a stock market rout, according to disclosure filings. Ms. Bondi, whose political and financial fortunes have been greatly enhanced by her association with Mr. Trump, authorized the transaction on April the 2nd, the day the White House unveiled its shock and awe levies against American trading partners, according to a report she filed with the Office for Government Ethics last week. The stock market plummeted on news of the announcement, depressing the share price of Trump media. That is called insider trading. That is illegal. She should be done. Grift, grift, grifty, grift, grifty, grifty, grift. State department officials have campaigned to force Gambia to license Starlink, even threatening to cancel development projects. US diplomats are now working on behalf of Elon Musk. So US diplomats are forcing countries, when their trade deal negotiations have already reported on this, by the way, to take on Starlink because, you know, Musk is at the center of the government, although he's been kind of kicked sideways at the moment. He still gave $290 million of his money to invest in Donald Trump's electoral campaign. The return on investment is getting the government to work on his behalf to force other countries to take on Starlink. That is corruption. Anyway, let's talk about this kind of transactional approach to politics, and we'll dip into the rest of this politics. Katy Kay and Auntie Scaramucci talking about how Trump does transactional politics.
I think what Trump is hitting up against is that his theory doesn't take into account historical or cultural or ethnic forces that override those mercantilist impulses. So that's why he hasn't managed to have much success in Ukraine, because the Ukrainians are fighting an existential war. If they don't get a good deal, what they perceive as a good deal for their sovereignty, whatever deal is signed doesn't mean the Ukrainians are going to stop fighting. This is why he's having such problems bringing about, you know, the Riviera in Gaza, because there are very strong forces at work here. It's why it didn't work in North Korea. In some cases.
So what she's saying here is that Trump is very transactional, but he's also mercantilist, which is to say that everything's about trade. But if your entire understanding of world politics is just in terms of trade, like he answered the question the other day about Ukraine. He's like, yeah, I've just made, you know, that money pissing it away, and then we made more than that in just a few days in the Middle East than what we've given to Ukraine. And he's like seeing everything in just monetary terms. He's a merchant, right? This is mercantilist, and that is Katy Kay saying, actually, that's a really stunted appraisal of how geopolitics works. If you don't understand the context of, you know, ethnicity and culture and history and so on and so forth in these different areas, then you're not getting it, which is like what is underwriting the issues of the peace deals in Ukraine, because Trump just thinks a freaking minerals deal is all that you need between both Russia, the US and Russia, and US and Ukraine. Do a minerals deal, that'll sort everything out. Bob's your uncle. No, that these people are fighting for their lives. They don't give a damn about a minerals deal with the US. They give a damn about a foreign invading army in their homeland, and they will fight tooth and nail. They'll fight to their deaths to get rid of that army. Now, if you're not understanding geopolitics in any way other than a mercantile sense and a transactional sense, then you are not going to be good at geopolitics.
Is he can have successes with this type of approach. And I get your point about America had a long period where it did think it could go in and remake the world in America's model, and he has just upended that. I wanted to just read you a couple of things, because I thought this week this felt very appropriate. This is what George W. Bush said in his second inaugural address in 2005. The survival of liberty in our land increasingly depends on the success of liberty in other lands. The best hope for peace in our world is the expansion of freedom in all the world. So it is the policy of the United States to seek and support the growth of democratic movements and institutions in every nation and culture, with the ultimate goal of ending tyranny in our world. That was 20.
And that's brilliant. I'm no fan of George Bush, but he's absolutely nailed that. 2005, we need liberty and freedom around the world, because that's what gives stability, and our ideals should be the ideals of the world, and that will lead to prosperity and safety, etc., etc. Whereas Trump's like, yeah, no, that sounds too complicated to me. We just want to do deals where America makes loads of money. Yeah, woo! And he goes to Qatar and says to the Emir of Qatar, God, this is amazing. Look at the gold and marble. Look at that Mars, it's incredible. And he goes to Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman says, there's no one hotter than you. Yeah, you just paid me loads of money. Yeah, there's no one hotter than you. You're amazing. It's like there's no understanding of the intricacies of geopolitics and the understanding of what freedom is to the world, and therefore what it should mean, and also what it should mean to the United States. To have liberty and democracy around the world is in America's best interest. He doesn't get it. That's not on his radar, and that's Caddy K is brilliantly expressing this.
Years ago. This week, Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia. This great transformation has not come from Western interventionists giving you lectures on how to live or to govern your own affairs. Instead, the birth of a modern Middle East has been brought about by the people of the region themselves, developing your own sovereign countries, pursuing your own unique visions, and charting your own destinies. In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built. I mean, I think those...
And that is a really fascinating dichotomy there. Now, there is some truth in saying that the US has been at fault, as many countries have, in going around the world and trying to change democracies and nation build. But where they've gone wrong, interestingly, in my opinion, is where they've tried to do that in a purely mercantile way. It's like, you can there's a John Pilger's great documentary, The War on Democracy, where you see the US as upending, like, democratically voted for kind of socialist democracies in South America over like the 50 years after the end of the Second World War. And then it's like, you go look at the great Canadian documentary, The Corporation, where it's like going into places like Bolivia and trying to privatize water, so people have to pay for, water, but it comes through some American company, so there's nation building in the sense of like, we want democracy around the world. And like, hopefully what we're doing with Ukraine, which is like defending democracy from a purely ideological point of view, and then there's like going into countries to nation build them, but actually what you're doing is just using that as a platform to drive your own corporations into that country in a kind of imperialistic but mercantilist kind of way. And so maybe where it's gone wrong is when it's been too kind of Trumpian in that, although Trump here appears to be saying, you do you, and eventually we'll do business. It doesn't matter if you go around killing people in your own country. If you give me a nice jet, that's cool. It doesn't matter.
Went back and looked at Bush's second inaugural, which is kind of peak neocon philosophy, peak interventionist, peak America can rebuild the world in its own image. And then you look at what Donald Trump has just said this week, and I agree with you that it is a repudiation that is valid, because the nation builders, as Trump says, did wreck more than they built. I'm just not sure that it is a model that works for every country and every situation. And if Donald Trump has the kind of grandiose view of himself that he can make deals based on money effectively that will supersede policies and culture and other countries' desires, I'm not sure it's always going to work, which is why we don't have peace in Ukraine yet and why we don't have peace in Gaza yet. In fact, we may be on the brink of even more atrocities in the Gaza Strip. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think it's brilliantly insightful. I just want to add 2 sentences, and then I want to talk about MBS, if that's okay. So 2 sentences I would add is that Cheney was really the architect of this interventionist strategy.
Yes.
Cheney basically said...
Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, that crowd of neocons.
Yes, we control the world. We are the massive military might. Let's go into the Middle East, rough these people up, take 9/11 as the crisis that we need to rough everybody up and get them in line and get them to live the American way, okay, which was highly arrogant. Okay, George Soros, by the way, in a November op-ed 2001 New York Times, George Soros, the legendary investor, considered to be a pariah by conservatives, but George Soros wrote, "Please do not overreact. Osama bin Laden wants you to overreact. You've lost 3,000 lives. It's a horrific tragedy. But if you go to war in the Middle East, you're going to end up in an endless war. You're going to spill a lot of treasure. You're going to actually weaken the country if you do that." And bin Laden actually said this on the dark web in the late 90s after he bombed the embassy sites in Africa. He said, "I'm going to spill your blood like we did the Soviets. We're going to come hit you on your land. You're going to overreact and you're going to spill all your treasure. And of course, with the Patriot Act, you're going to take away your own civil liberties." And, Osama bin Laden was right about that. We've blown through $20 trillion doing stuff that we shouldn't have done. Soros became a pariah when he wrote that. Cheney targeted him. And they've spent 20 years chanting that he's a bad dude, even though what he said was actually insightful. If you don't mind, I'm just going to go to MBS because I know the Crown Prince. I've met the Crown Prince in the palace.
Did you get the lavender carpet?
I didn't get the...
So I'll leave it there, although I'd love to actually carry on because it was such a good episode that they always are. But I think it's really interesting. The different geopolitical ideologies and approaches of, say, Bush and the neocons and Trump. And I would say is going to be somewhere in the middle, because actually I don't think that neocon approach was entirely ideological either. I think it's just an excuse to, let's do it. Let's change them to the American way. But the American way is just having like Americanization of their economies and society rather than promote. So I would have a situation of promoting democracies and allowing those democracies to take the nation in the direction they go. But, rather than you should be more like us and we should be, having an economic deal with you that is essentially extractive and exploitative, which is what the kind of neocon approach ended up, I think, being. Anyway. Now, talking about sort of trade deals, as we've been
countries
dancing around the idea of trade deals, the US has said, look, we need 150 trade or 90 trade deals in 90 days. 150 countries want trade deals. Oh dear, there's not enough time to kind of sort all of this out. And everyone's been taking the mickey out of the US because they've had one trade deal with the UK, which isn't a trade deal. So it turns out that was not legally binding. So that trade deal was just powder puff. It's just nothing, right? And it only represents 3% of American trade anyway. But yeah, it wasn't a trade deal. And then with China, and that's not really amounted to nothing. And that's on a pause for 90 days as well. This is all just a complete disaster, it looks. This is what Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, says.
People. So 150 countries have been put on notice. How many deals do you think you're going to be able to announce, and how quickly?
Again, it will depend on whether they're negotiating in good faith. And there are a lot of smaller trading relationships that we can just come up with a number. My other sense is that we will do a lot of regional deals. This is the rate for Central America. This is the rate for this part of Africa. But what we are focused on right now are the 18 important trading relationships.
So the answer is zero. Nothing. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so no one appears to be doing any deals, it seems to me. Now, when we talk about deals that Trump says that he's responsible for making, so he said recently, we have at least 11 committed massive car factories, you know, the whole onshoring, we're going to put tariffs on, and as a result, oh, look at all these car manufacturers, they want to now onshore their manufacturing into the United States. He said, we have at least 11 committed massive car factories that are going to be built, that are in the process of being built. Some have actually started. And of course, as you know, that doesn't happen in 3 months, right? A car manufacturing, the car company doesn't go, oh my God, he's just put tariffs on. Quick, let's build something there. Have you got the plans for that? You can develop that in you got 3 hours. 3 hours, and I want the plans for a massive factory made. And I picked an area on Google Earth, so we're just going to plonk it there. And then you reckon we could get some employees in there in 2 weeks? Reckon 2 weeks? Yeah, okay. Oh, Ford has got a massive factory built in the middle of Pennsylvania. No, it doesn't happen like that. These things take years and years to prepare for. So it turns out these 11 committed massive car factories that are going to be built, that he's claiming responsibility for, effectively, were from the Biden administration. So Biden awards $1.7 billion to bring auto manufacturing back to 8 different states. This comes from July the 11th, 2024. The 11 facilities selected today include plants and suppliers for Hyundai, Bluebird, Cummins, Fiat Chrysler, GM, Harley Davidson, blah, 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 blah. And then you have Donald Trump saying, hey, the tariffs are amazing. We've got 11 facilities being built. Yeah, no, that was literally all Biden. And then he very controversially came out because Walmart said, we're going to start putting prices up. I saw someone from Walmart put the new prices on something that was going from $9.99 to $17.99. A picture just now. Walmart, says Donald Trump, Walmart should stop trying to blame tariffs as the reason for raising prices through the chain. Walmart made billions of dollars last year, far more than expected. Between Walmart and China, they should, as is said, eat the tariffs and not charge valued customers anything. I'll be watching, and so will your customers. Okay, so Trump doesn't know what he's talking about and has contradicted himself, saying that China will eat all the tariffs. That's what he's previously said. Now saying Walmart and China will eat the tariffs. Because China don't eat the tariffs because you can't tax another country. You cannot tax another country, right? So you tax your imports, you tax people who are buying that stuff from abroad. And as I've said to you before, very, very freaking clearly, there are 2 options for the way tariffs go. One, you pass that tariff on that is paid by the importer. They pass it to the wholesaler, that passes it to the distributor, that passes it to the consumer. Either all of that gets passed to the consumer, or it gets eaten by each one of those ports of call on the way to the consumer. In other words, it eats into the profits of anyone that's involved in getting that from the port to the consumer. And it can be a mixture of all of that. So some eating of the profits and some passing the price on to the consumer, or the consumer gets all of the tariff thrown onto the price, or none of it, and it's all eaten by those people on the way down. What Trump is now admitting is that tariffs aren't just taken on by the countries from where these goods come, because of course that's impossible, makes no sense. And he's saying, well, China need to eat some of the tariffs, but then Walmart should eat the tariffs. They were making billions of dollars. And that's what I'm saying. You are either going to get less profits or more expensive goods. Well, that's how it goes, or both, slightly both. And he's saying Walmart's profits should go down. In other words, the tariffs they're either a consumer sales tax or they are a commercial tax, or they are a business tax, business rates on these businesses that are bringing the goods into the country and selling to the consumer. They're either a sales tax or a business rate tax. And he is now saying that the tariffs are a business tax on Walmart in this case. The truth is starting to come out because he cannot deny it. The Walmart the Walmarts of the world are telling him it's going to cause prices to go up. So you say, you can't put prices up. Inflation is going to screw me. My popularity will go down. So you need to eat those prices. Okay, then you need to eat those tariffs. Okay, then it is a business rate. Thank you for telling us that this is indeed, at least partially, a tax on American businesses. So, finally, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to go to final part here is the interesting situation with Dan Bongino and Kash Patel. Dan Bongino and Kash Patel are these kind of right-wing nut jobs who've got the number 1 and 2 jobs. Kash Patel in charge of the FBI, Dan Bongino is number 2. They were formerly like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein, he never committed suicide. We're going to get those Epstein files and we're going to throw them out. And Pam Bondi was all about this. And then Pam Bondi had the files and then released it, but it's exactly the same release as previously with all the stuff redacted. And then is now saying, and they've redacted stuff due to national security, which means that Trump's probably involved in Jeffrey Epstein's history somehow, and it's too controversial to release them, so they're not releasing the Jeffrey Epstein files, right? And now Don Bongino and Kash Patel are saying, oh, and he definitely committed suicide. This is fascinating because the very right-wing ecosystem these guys existed in is now getting to hear the opposite of what they wanted to hear, and now they're starting to attack people like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel. So let's listen to the Fox News interview.
You said Jeffrey Epstein.
Maria Bartiromo is what I meant to say.
You said Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. People don't believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, they have a right to their opinion, but as someone who has worked as a public defender, as a prosecutor, who's been in that prison system, who's been in the Metropolitan Detention Center, who's been in segregated housing, you know a suicide when you see one, and that's what that was.
He killed himself. You want me to get? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
I know it's hard work. You said
I've seen the whole file. He killed himself. Now, I'm not really commenting on what's true or not there. I mean, I have no idea. I presume he killed himself, but you know, lots of conspiracy theories say that he can't have killed himself. Blah blah blah. Whatever. But it's the idea that these guys are having to say the opposite of what they were previously saying, which is leading to like an implosion in right-wing magosphere. Brian Tyler Cohen saying Bongino spent years whipping up his audience into a frenzy with right-wing conspiracy theories. Now that he's in a position where he could finally substantiate his own lies and can't, his audience is turning against him. As Zachary Patrizio says, Dan Bongino is now being labelled a deep state traitor by MAGA after saying Epstein killed himself. And so you can go and look at these claims. I have reviewed the case. Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. There's no evidence in the case file indicating otherwise. This statement is itself enough reason for me to never believe another word that Dan Bongino says. Deep state traitor. From Truth Volcano. America is not a her. You can't even define a woman. Please resign. Dan continues to strategically avoid addressing the most important and most concerning problems. January 6th bad actors from inside the FBI, the corrupt January 6th committee, the Doge uncovered crimes, the corruption inside Congress, Chelsea Clinton's role in USAID, Epstein list. Of course, all of this is right-wing nonsense that doesn't have any basis in, or conspiracy theory nonsense. It doesn't have any basis in truth. So he can't substantiate any of those because they're all nonsense. Dan, we need a better explanation than he killed himself. That's extremely insulting to the intelligence of the people who pay your salary. Judge us by the results. Quote, your department promoted a key figure in the persecution of the January 6ers. You've done nothing to expose Ray Epstein's and the other feds, blah, 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 blah. I just find it funny that to see these guys eating themselves. Pretty disastrous interview for Bongino and Patel today and for their MAGA supporters, as after years of railing against the deep state, they are left to admit there isn't a more sinister plot behind the Trump assassination attempt and Epstein killed himself. So again, the challenge on the Trump, they got nothing to say about, you know, is a troubled kid tried to kill Donald Trump. There you go. And probably had views that were maybe slightly more right-wing than they like to admit, and so they don't say anything about it. Even the right-wing Red State blogger sees the contradictions. Just when you thought it couldn't get worse for Bongino, far-right conspiracy theorist Alex Jones responded to Bongino's Epstein claim, claiming he quote, calls bullshit. That since led to Jones's followers pouring onto Bongino's comment section to attack the FBI deputy. I mean, it's all quite delicious seeing these people eat themselves, but it just goes to show, I think, how ridiculous those conspiracy theory claims are, because you get the conspiracy theorists into governments and they can't substantiate any of the claims. So either the people who are implicated in those, if you are to believe the conspiracy theories, then the people who are behind them are the Trump lot themselves, so they can't expose their own people, or it doesn't exist. It never happened like that, and it's not the conspiracy theory you think it was. And I guess the only other thing to say is a political shift that took place in mayoral race in a deep red state of Nebraska, in Omaha, and you had a mayor who was going for the fourth election, or had already been elected 4 times. Normally would be assumed to be a shoo-in, but given what has been happening in Trump world and in the US, they lost in a massive swing vote. So major breaking news: in a defeat that's left MAGA stunned, Democrat John Ewing Jr. has just won the mayoral race in deep red Omaha, Nebraska, defeating 12-year incumbent Mayor Gene Stothert. It's a 3 times 3 tenures there. This makes him the first black mayor in the history of the city, and Omaha was the 6th largest Republican-led city in the nation. Notice I said was. This spells disaster for Republicans in the midterm. So you could see it in that way. There's a long time till then, but there have been a number of special elections and sort of indications that actually the Republicans could be in trouble. And when you look at all the stuff I've just been talking about for the last bloody hour and 9 minutes, then that's what we should expect, because it's pretty despicable. And I have 3 other tab groups I'm not going to go through with you at the moment, but I will just indicate what they are. Some insane appointments. This whole tab group is about people who have been appointed who are insane and or problematic or really fascinating for a bunch of reasons that aren't particularly good for the Trump administration. So appointments there. There's a whole Kristi Noem being taken to task by all sorts of people in these select hearings, committee hearings, and it's embarrassing for Kristi Noem. She gets absolutely eviscerated as the secretary, the Department for Homeland Secretary, and Homeland Security Secretary. Absolutely taken to pieces. And then a whole thing on law and habeas corpus and the problems with the Trump administration's legal approaches and how it's looking pretty dictatorial. Anyway, I'll go into them in a separate video because this one has been far too long as it is. But for the meantime, take care of yourselves. Hopefully this was of use. Hopefully there's a kind of narrative that goes through it all, and it's not just like random stuff assembled together. So hopefully it all makes sense. I try and arrange things in a way that goes from one to the other. I sometimes have to move them around as I'm thinking on the fly that actually things will be better here than there, but hopefully it all makes sense. Thank you for listening. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.